Hey y'all, I'm Kelly Moody and you're listening to the Ground Shots podcast, an audio project exploring our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling with farmers, herbalists, craftspeople, naturalists, artists, and more.
Lots of locust cedar splits, I offer sweat and splinters. Forest elders breathe their last, I'll bring them for your supper.
I'm recording this right now from Durango, Colorado, and it's early September. Actually, a cold storm just hit after a bunch of really hot 95-degree days. It's pretty wild. I'm really glad that Gabe and I got out of the high country right before the storm. Otherwise, we would be probably trekking through snow, which I don't necessarily mind if I have the right gear, but we're just figuring out how to be back in the world. So yeah, we finished the Colorado Trail probably like the 1st or 2nd of September, and we took about 2 months, and we put out one episode a couple episodes ago that was recorded during the first, I'd say, 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks of the walk that we did, documenting and discussing the different sort of things we were thinking about at that time. And since then, we have recorded more journal entries, but since being on the trail, after a while, honestly, going into resupply towns, I had a really hard time trying to also do a lot on the podcast while in town. During that first couple weeks when we resupplied, we had like a 3-day resupply, so I had a little more time to record something on our phone and get it uploaded and take notes and do more of the things that it takes to record and edit podcasts. So this is coming out now after we're done with the walk or the Plan to Go project that we did. The conversation within this is definitely from I don't even know when we recorded it, 1st or 2nd week of August of 2020, this past summer. So a lot of what we talked about in this conversation that we recorded way out there on the trail there's a lot that has evolved since then, and we'll probably be putting out some more kind of after this goes out. We actually were interviewed for the Voices for Nature and Peace podcast with Colibri, who was on our podcast here this past spring, and he asked us a lot of questions that maybe we would not have thought about our walk. So he interviewed us just a few days right after we got off, and I'm not sure exactly when that episode's going out, but I think it'll be probably pretty soon. So you should go check out Calibri's podcast, Voices for Nature and Peace, which has been running this whole summer. And he's been expanding on some of the topics that we talked about in that episode, and also has really been staying up to date with some of the protests and political on the ground interviews this summer too, with everything that's been going on. So I highly recommend y'all go check out the project that he's really embarked on there. So anyhow, look out for that as well. And then we did do a recording on the trail too with our friend Teo, who came to walk with us. That was definitely very candid and field recorded, so we're not sure yet if that audio is going to be good enough for the podcast based on just wind and all these elements that you can't really help sometimes out there. So stay tuned. I'll let y'all know if there's anything else coming out sort of from the trail. In the meantime, we have this conversation that was recorded with Gabe Crawford, and this summer, Gabe, who's been on the podcast a couple times, speaking about wild tending and invasive plants, and I did the Colorado Trail this summer, and we ended up actually doing an extra 200 miles, just about almost 200 miles, so that is about a 600-mile walk, and we kind of were creative with the way that we did it. And so if you listen to the first episode where we're talking about what we're actually doing, it was not necessarily a normal thru-hike. So I'd highly recommend going back and listening to that episode to learn more about our intentions of the walk and what we're calling the Plan to Go. And we also have a couple videos on YouTube where we talk more about it, and on my Instagram and his Instagram. Mine's at Golden Berries and his is at Plums for Bums. So you can find at least my Instagram linked in the show notes too to see more videos that kind of like expand on what the project is. So in this episode, we have another song that was recorded on the trail by Duncan Hardy. We featured one of his original songs in the first Plan to Go recap episode, and I recorded this second song also in Breckenridge while we were resupplying and kind of camping out on the trail just outside of town. And this song that is you'll hear in this episode is called Work Overtime. And I just again love Duncan's music and just is really beautiful. I really hope that he records some of his music at some point. And in that song, we were outside hanging out, and a thunderstorm kind of just popped up over top of us by the end of the song, so you might hear a little thunder in it. That's just the nature of the trail, so, and being outside. With that, I'll go ahead and send y'all off to listen to this episode. Another one from the field. I believe we were at Texas Creek. We might mention it in the episode, which is a really beautiful place. We actually took a 0 day or like a rest day out there on that, I believe is on the west side of the Collegiate Loop, which is sort of one route you can take of the Colorado Trail. It splits in two at some point. We kind of described that in the conversation, so I'll leave the rest of that for y'all to listen to. So enjoy this episode. Happy listening.
Logs of locust cedar splits, I offer sweat and splinters.
All right, an update. So Gabe and I are on mile, I have no idea, 300 something maybe of the Colorado Trail 2020. Plan to go walk. What do you think? How many miles do you think we've done, Gabe?
I don't know.
You don't know? I know. We haven't really been counting.
I would say, yeah, probably in the 300s somewhere.
300 somewhere.
Yeah.
And we're by a river.
And we're not even close to being done.
We're not. We're by a river. What's it called?
Texas Creek.
Texas Creek. And we're cooking dinner right now, and we have been meaning to do another recording for the podcast on our walk, but we haven't in a little while, so we're just sitting right now and talking about all kinds of things and thought we would record a little bit. So not 100% sure all of what we'll be talking about, but we're just gonna go with it, and it's candid recordings from the trail.
Yeah.
Trying to make dinner happen.
Yeah.
Sunset.
That's right. And our tarp shelter.
Yeah, we got a tarp shelter up. We took a rest day today because we haven't done that in a while, except for kind of in a town.
But town rest days are never restful.
I know, like, when we go to town and we end up spending the whole day, I'm always just, like, exhausted from the stimulus, you know?
This is too good of a place. We were going to try to walk farther yesterday, and then when I got into this area, I saw, like, the open meadows, and I was like, man, this is a perfect place to plant yampa, and I don't want to just, like, walk and plant right now. I want to be more intentional about it and take some time.
You mean like walk and keep your backpack on and be like bending over, like,
and be bending over, planting as I go. And it's like I got this bundle of seeds, and I have another bundle of seeds waiting, and this is just a great place to plant. And there's already so much biscuit root here, and I just asked Kelly if we could camp here, and then this morning we spontaneously just decided to do a rest day today and then do a bigger day tomorrow. And
we had plenty of food, so
yeah,
we just could if we wanted, you know.
And
somehow we ended up with like 9 dinners, and like I don't know how.
We're always
of ramen.
We're always overpacking, it seems, but whatevs.
Yeah.
We're on the west side of the Collegiate mountain range on a part of the Colorado Trail that is the proper Continental Divide. And so in Twin Lakes, Colorado, where the Colorado Trail splits into 2 trails. It goes around the east side of the Collegiate Range, and then the Continental Divide goes around the west side, and hikers usually pick one. Some people do both and do a loop, and we did the loop, and it meets up at a place called Monarch Pass. The 2 trails come back together, and so we went on the east side, and then at Monarch Pass we looped around and went back up, and now we're going back. It's like we're backtracking now.
Yeah, it's kind of a trip.
It's kind of weird to backtrack, but we're coming back north.
Because there's like a flow when you're walking through, you know, but it's kind of cool too because some of the watersheds we walked through before are like the creeks. We're seeing a different part of them, or like upstream, or like the creeks that make that creek.
Yeah.
That then that creek makes another river, you know. So.
Yeah. So we're getting to know this mountain range very well, and some people I've heard say they think, or they have heard, that the east side of the Collegiate Range is boring, and I really disagree. I think if you have an eye for it, and I have an eye for appreciation for ecology, the east side was amazing, because on the east side, to the east of us, is Buena Vista and Salida, and those are in like the high desert valleys of the Arkansas River. So the Arkansas River Valley, right now I think we're actually on the west side of the Continental Divide. So the water, Texas Creek that we're on right now, if I'm correct, since we're on the west side of the divide, that water goes...
It's kind of confusing right here.
Yeah, sometimes it's kind of confusing because it can be a little deceiving, but any watershed on the west side of the Continental Divide goes to the Pacific Ocean, and then all the other... And in this area, all of the watersheds on the east side of the Continental Divide drain into the Arkansas River, which goes into the Mississippi and then into the Atlantic Ocean, which is really cool. So
the Continental Divide is an actual... It's like an actual line that they've drawn to designate like where all the water on one side goes to the Atlantic or the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah. And all the water on the other side goes to the Pacific or the Gulf of... What's the name?
The Sea of Cortez.
Sea of Cortez.
So on the west side, in this major area of Colorado and south, all of the water drains into the Colorado River, which empties into the Sea of Cortez eventually. Okay. You know, so the really cool thing about this experience and walking through place in this way with this perspective of knowing place is seeing this place as a big body, you know, and all of these arteries are like the river, and mountains are like these massive hearts that pump water or blood out through like these arteries and veins and to all of the surrounding areas, and then eventually back into the ocean. And even though Turtle Island is big and vast, when you know place and you know how everything is connected, and really water is the force that connects all these places, and mountains are the places where those waterways originate, you start to see, you know, the term small world. It's a big world, but it's also a small world at the same time. And it's kind of a trip. As a person on foot, you feel small when you're walking up these giant mountains. Yeah. You know, but at the same time, the experience of walking through, you kind of get this like more personal insight, you know, that makes you more familiar, which like you said, makes it seem smaller in certain ways too. Like you see how the mountain we just walked over is connected to the mountain before. Yeah. And how they have a relationship with each other and the waters between them, and as you walk, you connect those dots. At least what you do experience is connected together in some way, you know? Yeah, so. It's all, and that's one thing I've been really feeling as I've been walking, and as I recently finished this book that we picked up in Twin Lakes. It's called Wilderness Passage. It's by this old writer back in the 1900s named Forrester Blake, and the main antagonist are the settlers, actually, and particularly the Mormon settlers, you know, and it's like basically the perspective of a trapper of two trappers who've been living in the area for a long time and have really good relationships with all of the indigenous peoples of the whole area. And when the state of Deseret starts moving in, like the Mormon occupation of the Salt Lake Valley and of Utah, and how they get caught in this like really bad mess between the Mormon state of Deseret and the U.S. government. But just the way the way the writer studied, he knew his geology and he knew his geography, and the way he went through this whole story through the perspective of mountain men who knew every river and every creek, every nook and cranny of really the whole West, because these guys knew everything from basically from Taos up to the Columbia River and east into the Missouri River and its tributaries, and the way it speaks to how they knew how to find these places and how all these places were connected by rivers and trails, and how those trails were, and talks about the buffalo trails, and it talks about like buffalo in Utah and in Colorado and in all these places, and really cool perspective just on place and knowing place from that perspective, because these people traveled everywhere on horse, and I also grew up Mormon, and so that was a really cool perspective, because I grew up with this really whitewashed history, inaccurate, innocent seeming history of the Mormon organization and cult, and then I also have grown up, you know, I grew up on the Southern Ute Reservation outside of Durango, you know, and I know all these areas like around Utah and all these areas that they're talking about, and then getting that perspective on it as we're walking, because they always talked about the Great Arkansas River too. They talk about the Arkansas River, and here we're like in the area of the Arkansas headwaters around Leadville and stuff, and the way they talk about just how once this white settlers started coming in and making camps, the land started to become more permanently trashed, and the land's ability to recover from making these settlements and these camps became really difficult, you know. So it was a really cool book. I got really into it's a really big, thick book, too really heavy to carry.
Literally this book from the 1930s that was printed in the 1930s.
It was amazing.
It was like a hardback book that he like grabbed and read voraciously and then
finished it in a couple days.
And
it was
walking with it, and
such a good book. It actually really messed up my writing routine because of how good it was, but it also kind of like gave me some inspiration for writing too. And
there's some things in that book. I'm eating pine nuts right now. If you hear the crack in the background, cracking noises, there's sticks cracking and pine nuts cracking and maybe other noises, but we're outside, so it is what it is. But you were mentioning that you were surprised in this book by, like, some of the, they called the Utes something else, right? Like, there was just certain things.
They talked about the Yampa Utes, and that's such a fascinating
and they just
thing.
called them the Yampa?
They called them they just said the Yampa camps or Yampa Utes, you know, and just like there was the Pa Utes, you know, and like the PAH. -UTES, Paiutes, and like Paiutes, and then
which is a different group of people in Nevada.
But then they also mentioned the Paiutes too, like PIUTES too, and then the Yampa bands, the Yampa camps, and the by the Grand River, which is the old name for the Colorado River, and the Yampa River, and in the northeastern part of Colorado. In that book, I was like, wow, that's such an interesting perspective on that, you know, because this book really really saw the bad guys in the book really were like the settlers that were coming in, and it really, this book,
which wouldn't be a common narrative
no,
of that time period, the 1930s.
no, exactly,
It'd be
because
about
they were all
like promoting manifest destiny. And
yeah, absolutely, and it doesn't talk really fondly of manifest destiny, and it really kind of talks about like how the book comes from, it gets really into the lives of these settlers, like whether they're Mormon or just Christians coming from the East, and like how like miserable the settlers were and how terrified they were, and just like how shitty it was, like coming out to these areas and settling and like not knowing a damn thing about the landscape and the ecology.
And they thought they were told it was one way, and then it was
something
else.
totally different. And because usually you just like the stories are all glorified and innocent, and like
a lot of parts of the West are so dry.
Yeah.
And you can't farm or like tend them in the same ways you would out east. And we've been carrying another book around to this sort of land reader of the Rocky Mountains, and specifically it's focused on all the Rockies, but there's a lot of stories of this area in it, and there's stories of like all different perspectives in this reader, and some of them I don't agree with and some of them I do agree with, but they talk a lot. There's a couple on just telling different stories of people's, how they ended up out west, ranchers or somebody's family having to leave Kansas during the Dust Bowl, and a lot of the time people came out thinking it was going to be some sort of paradise or something, and it is a beautiful, amazing place, but it's pretty different than a lot of the West. Is pretty different than the East. I mean, Utah, where a lot of the Mormons settled, is pretty dry and desertous.
Yeah.
Nevada is pretty desertous. So people had a hard time, and just traveling through too. But
yeah.
I mean, obviously we're just trying to look at as much as we can about what happened in this place, and these stories and this perspective is one that is complicated, and like the intersections of all these like things that were happening and how it affected the land that we see now,
Yeah, that story was such a cool perspective on really all of the different layers of people, cultures, and events happening. And really that was in the 1800s, and here we are in 2020. Like, that wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
And that's what's so crazy. And we're walking through this place and observing, and we're planting seeds, and we're doing some wild tending, but we're also observing and documenting, and for me it's in the form of like storytelling and weaving this tapestry of like history, culture, ecology, politics, and economy, and how
in your personal journey.
Yeah, and but because like, and how we're a thread in that tapestry, and the inseparability of us from ecology, and all of these human dynamics from ecology, they're inseparable. But the non-linearness of time, like past, present, future, it's not linear like that, because like how it's all woven in together, like reading this story and getting those perspectives, and then being here in the Arkansas River drainage, or in the area of the headwaters of the Arkansas River. We went through the Leadville area, and just seeing like all of like the mining portals scarring this landscape like pockmarks all over the mountains, and going by areas where there's like a stream, and then a mining portal with mining tailings everywhere.
And then the stream is orange.
And then the stream is like red and orange.
From the mine.
And then in that land reader, getting a different perspective from a rancher in Buena Vista area about this mining company called Arsico in Leadville, and how Leadville is historically, just a historical fact to give people some context. Leadville was one of the richest and the most long-standing and running mining camp in the history of the United States. And Leadville contaminated the Arkansas River so bad that it killed all of the fish. And when we did a detour in the Mount Massive Wilderness, we walked through this massive area that's called the Leadville National Fish Hatchery that we later learned.
Ew, where do we learn?
When we were hitchhiking, some guy that's lived in the area. And that's a cool thing. Like, you get the perspective from the locals who know the history, too, from a different perspective. And he was saying that it was actually the mining companies that funded
the
fish hatchery.
And the fish hatchery has been around longer than the state of Colorado was designated.
Yeah.
Because they needed to create a place where the fish could thrive so that people could actually eat, because they had killed all the fish.
And
basically.
it was also done so the mining companies could, like, do a lip service to the people to make them happy and continue to mine. And there was this fascinating article written by this rancher in Buena Vista who, you know, because usually I'm not super fond of ranchers, but this is like one of the complexities in the non-gray areas of it, where in Buena Vista, this rancher was actually one of the main activists advocating for the Arkansas River and standing up and risking his own safety, standing up to the mining CEOs of this Arsico company.
This piece was written in a way to me that really felt so visceral, because he's telling the story from his perspective. I'm pretty sure he's the writer, the rancher.
Yeah.
I think it was also his father's land or something like that, and
it was like old family land.
It's like the place is kind of falling apart, and he's talking about what the land used to look like before the mine. It's like sludge basically, like, spilled into the river and, like, went downstream.
And the river was orange.
And how the grasses used to grow so tall and rich and lush, and then they sort of were stunted, and then the animals were dying from eating the grass, and
because they irrigated their fields with
the water from the river.
From the river.
Just a different perspective on, like, how a corporation coming in and taking advantage of the land and, like, doing whatever they want, really. Because a lot of this time during these, you know, I lived in California for a while too. Like, there was the gold mining rush in California as well. There's just, like, it was like a period of lawlessness. Like, it happened so quick. People were so money hungry, and just it was really hard to kind of, like, know what people were doing, you know, and to control the pollution, because there wasn't really a good infrastructure in place to do that, and people didn't really even fully know how bad they were fucking up things, you know.
No.
And sometimes they did, and they wanted to get their money and go, you know, because there's some stories in this Land Reader too about that, which is a whole other thing, but just about people really knowing often the harm they were doing to the land and the local people. But in this case, like, this guy's just, like, telling his story from the perspective of him being on this land and watching it throughout his entire lifetime, and seeing it be messed up by the mine. And it's crazy, because I think about that whole watershed that the Arkansas River feeds into, and how I wonder, like, I don't know, I mean, but it just affects everything downstream, and no matter what, even if it's incrementally, you know. And there's still a lot of ground to cover after that. And
it's like we said about place is not, even though Turtle Island is this vast place, it's a small world, and all these places are very interconnected, and water is like the web that interconnects these places. And the Arkansas is actually, I didn't really realize it until recently, but the Arkansas River is huge. It's a really long river.
It connects into the Missouri and then the Mississippi.
I don't know.
I'll look at that again.
Yeah, we'll have to look at that again. But
I was having a conversation with someone one time about, like, how, you know, I hear people talk about bioregionalism, and, like, this idea of, like, if you engage the land within a bioregional way, then it's like less impact overall in the world and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, how would you actually define where a bioregion begins and ends? You know, I don't know who I was talking to this about. Maybe it was Zach Elfers, who's been on the podcast. Potentially, he said that because you can't really put like lines like here it ends and here it begins, you know. But he said that he sees it more like rivers are bioregions, how they're woven together is how the bioregions interact. So, but then I'm like, okay, if a river is a bioregion, then it's the whole, like, even though where the Arkansas River begins and where it flows into another river it changes, the land around it changes so much, but yet that vein is constant. It really reminds me that places that seem so different are connected in that way, you know.
And like you said in the last recording, that ecology is not compartmentalized. It's not compartmentalizable. There's no borders and boundaries and lines ecologically. There's like interpenetrations, which brings me around to like when I was saying how much I like the east side, which some people thought was boring. The high desert foothills in the Arkansas River Valley, which is high desert, its fingers reach up as high as they can find themselves able to into the east side south facing slopes of the Collegiate Mountains. And like the Collegiate Mountains have a ton of these really big 14ers. Like we've been walking below the summits of 14ers the whole time, you know. So these mountains they're big.
They're huge. Like 14,000 foot mountains.
Yeah, 14,000, like no joke. But then we also on the east side we're up pretty high in like the Doug fir kind of limber pine ecozone, and there's like little stunted pinyon pines up there that are like these little weird funky little bonsai bushes, and that's like
they're farthest... in like the open meadows, and they look more like a little small bush or something.
Yeah, seeing that is so cool. And then like when you go onto the south facing slopes, it goes from, depending on what altitude you're at, it kind of goes from that more coniferous forest, which there's different kinds of conifer communities at different altitudes, but once you get on the south facing slopes, it turns into like a chaparral of like mountain mahogany and sagebrush, and then those are the best places to plant roots, because that's what they like those open, drier areas. So in like those areas, that's where we saw the biggest densities of wild onions.
So for people who don't know about these ecologies, pinyon juniper forest is like kind of a ecological, these two plants have an ecological relationship often together, and sometimes the juniper changes species and sometimes the pinyon changes species, but they tend to be in hotter, drier, lower places. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say anywhere from 6 to 8, maybe 9,000 feet is like the pinyon juniper zone. And here in the Rocky Mountains, that ecology would be called the foothills ecology. And then the next after the foothills is montane, which is like Doug fir and ponderosa, parkland kind of ecology.
So we were kind of just surprised to see pinyon because, you know, we were in New Mexico all winter and like spent a lot of time in Nevada. I guess in Durango, where you grew up in the southwest corner of Colorado, there's a lot of pinyon and juniper. But just being up in the Rockies, I guess we were like surprised and happy and excited to see them.
Yeah, it's so cool. I was like, how could you think the east side is boring? Look at this, it's a pinyon.
Did we see bristlecones on the east side too?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, and then because we had this little predicament where we were like, so what's the limber pine again? Like, now we're like confident in our ability to identify limber pines, you know, and it was just really cool getting to know them and what they like and where they like to be, and finding some consistency and rapport with limber pine.
So maybe we can do a little because we've been wanting to talk more specifically about plants and plant communities too, but bristlecone pines are some of the oldest trees on earth besides aspens, and aspen trees kind of are a colony oriented tree. They mostly grow that way, and so the underground roots of aspens are very old. So technically, aspens are the oldest trees on Earth, but
and the biggest, right?
And the biggest because they're all the trees are actually one single clonal organism.
Yeah.
But single trees that are look like separate trees or whatever, I think that bristlecones are some of the oldest on Earth, and the bristlecones that grow in Colorado are technically like a different species than what would be in Nevada and California.
It's the Rocky Mountain bristlecone.
But they look pretty similar, and they get pretty old, but not quite as old as the other bristlecones. And they like high altitude. Yeah. And they like harsh environments. Yeah. So usually in California and Nevada, where you see like these old groves, in Utah there's some too. They're on the place where they're in a place where nothing else wants to grow. Yeah. Pretty much, and they look worn out and gnarly and like twisted, and they're not like giant or anything either, usually.
Some of these Rocky Mountain bristlecones have been
big though.
Big, like really big. I was shocked how big some of them are, and it's kind of predictable where they'll grow. Like if you're above 12,000 feet here and can find a south-facing slope, remember that one pass saddle we went over right below Mount Yale? Yeah, and there was bristlecones right like on the north side of it, it was like bare, and then there's like those stunted spruce, like high alpine spruce and alpine fir that were all stunted. But then you went right over to the south side of the slope, and there's all these huge old bristlecone forest groves, and we've seen some big ones, but maybe they don't grow as old or whatever. They have a bottle brush looking needle structure, so it almost looks like what you clean your bottles out with. Like literally, they have these really cool, shorter, pokey needles. And do you think these needles are shorter than the other bristlecone needles?
I can't remember. I think that they seem a little bit longer to me, but I can't remember for sure. And the cones are distinguished by the fact that they have little bristles that stick out, right? Yeah. Is that correct, Gabe? Yeah, bristlecone. There's some other things that distinguish them, but
the resin glands.
There's resin glands that on the needles that on this bristlecone. I'm not sure if the other bristlecones have this, but I know on the Rocky Mountain one, there's some sort of gland that let the sap kind of seeps out on the needles. Yeah. So it looks like there's like snow on them sometimes, but it's actually little bits of resin. Yeah. It's really cool.
The book said that that's like one of the most reliable ways to tell if it's a bristlecone.
So limber pine is one we've mentioned. We've been seeing a lot. Grows also at high elevation, but maybe grows a little lower too. Yeah. And I noticed that in Nevada as well.
It's like there was like the below the spruce zone is like the lodgepole zone, and then below the lodgepole zone is like the Doug fir, and that's where I've noticed the most limbers is in that Doug fir zone.
It's interesting because in Nevada, when you go visit the bristlecones, the limber pines kind of grow right up against them at the high elevation. Yeah. But every place has a different kind of way. Like it's really cool to go to different places. In all my travels, like really to getting to see patterns of how elevation and also where I am, latitude, like in latitude, and all these things affect the relationships. But there's a lot of things that stay the same, and some things shift. But so, anyways, limber pine also kind of has a bottle brush needle look to it. Yeah. Do they both? How many needles? Do you remember how many needles?
I think they both have 5.
5 needles?
Because limber pine
is a white pine.
Is in the white pine group, which has 5 needles, Yeah. And that helped me because that was confusing for me, I was finding the cones. I was like, I swear to God, this is a white pine cone. Like, it looks like just...
The bristlecone has got 5 needles as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And lodgepole has 2, right?
2. And 2 needle, and then...
The pinions that grow here also have 2. And then ponderosa pine has 5?
3?
4? I should know this.
I just saw the other day. I don't know. I had it the other day, though. I was like, 3, Gabe. It has 3. Remember this.
These kinds of things are nice for identifying pines. See, we're still working it out. I should know ponderosas
But it's
since
just
I live
fun.
in California, but
When you can see past the wall of green, you know, your walks with the land never are.
You're always kind of reading what's happening, because when you can see, certain pines grow at certain elevations.
Yeah.
Then you can read something about where you are, like, okay, I must be facing this way or that way or whatever.
You learn how to read the land like a book, and I think that is like, to me, that's what wealth means, is like knowing place and knowing how to read the land and going across the country and being able to apply those same patterns. It's like learning the patterns of botany.
Mm-hmm.
You know, once you can learn the patterns, you can apply them everywhere you go.
I feel like the Ground Shots Project is this thing that's like evolved and dominated my life the past 7 years, or 5 to 7 years. It really has been about that for me, is just sort of picking up these patterns and learning plants and places and getting really geeky in one place, and then moving through a landscape and like seeing how I can connect them, you know. And this walk has been a really cool way to slow down and really see what I can piece together from what I've learned over the years, both, you know, being out east, which supposedly is a totally different environment, right? The southeast where I grew up. But even there, the subtropical south has things that have taught me about how to learn from this land, you know. And I think,
remember the Sochan when we were down in Buena Vista area? We saw Sochan again, and
Sochan is a plant that I learned when I lived in North Carolina, and I guess they call it, Sochan is a name they call it in Asheville, and I don't know if that's a Cherokee name or like, I can't remember where Sochan came from, that name, but I think it's called cutleaf. What's it called?
Cutleaf coneflower.
Cutleaf coneflower.
In the Rudbeckia genus.
And they call it that here in the books and stuff, but
it likes to grow at lower elevations,
on the creeks and
in
stuff.
The foothill kind of ecology.
And so out in the southeast, where I've spent some time and where I grew up, Sochan kind of grows all in the forest, anywhere really, and people use it in perennial gardening. They pull it out of the forest and then it just like proliferates, and it's got a great edible green that lasts all season. And so
the stalks are delicious.
Yeah, we've been seeing it a lot more in the beginning, but we've been seeing it here and there, especially around the creeks, because here it's very different. Like when you're right on the creek, like literally like 3 feet on both sides of the creek, there's this whole little eco zone, and then as you get away from the creek, it changes back into, say, maybe, I mean, it really depends on where you are, but
I think the altitude, they like the foothills and montane.
Yeah, but once you get really high, you don't see it as much. But that's been a really exciting one. I'm like, okay, I learned that, you know, when I was in the southeast, and here I am seeing it and being able to eat it some. And
then you taught me about it, and now she's one of my new lovers.
Sochan.
Yeah. All my plant lovers.
And then it's funny, I got an email from Mark Williams, because he's been sending me his, which if you don't know who Mark Williams is, he's an amazing ethnobotanist in the southeast who's just like inspirational to me. The amount of research and organizing of information about plants that he does and observations that he does. But he has this thing called Botany Every Day that he runs pretty much for free, donation based, sliding scale, whatever. And he sends out lessons basically that build on themselves. And he's sent me the Woody Plants, or no, was it Woody Plants? Yeah, Woody Plants lesson recently. And I was reading through all the geeky botany, and he always makes lists of what's flowering where he is. And Sochan was on the list, I'm pretty sure.
So it's a
like,
cool way to,
it's flowering here too in the Southern Rocky Mountains.
So neat.
So it's just, and the anemone was flowering there, and actually the anemone is starting to be done here.
It's interesting. We've seen we've seen so many different kinds of anemone. 2, we've seen so many different kinds of anemone in different parts of Colorado at different elevations. So, and we've really kind of been in a perpetual spring since this winter in Arizona to Gila to southern Colorado to the high country.
It's been a unique, because we were in the Sonora in February, Sonoran Desert. Oh, we were in California before that. Then we were in Sonoran Desert.
And then Gila.
Which spring starts very early. And then we were in the Gila wilderness area in New Mexico. And then...
So getting that perspective of like this constant spring has been really trippy. And now, because August, for people who aren't familiar with the Rocky Mountains, you know, we're at 10,000 feet and up and we're in the subalpine zone, and then up in the alpine zone, really summer ends in like August. Really. Yeah,
it's kind of like spring starts in June, and then there's like 2 weeks of what I guess would be summer, and then it's fall. It's like...
And the wildflower blooms have been just like absolutely jaw-dropping and epic. And since it was an early snow melt, and this year we had an early wildflower, you know, season, and it like went, and we've gotten to witness it in so many different flows and flavors and places. But now we're finally starting to see the waning of that in the high country, except in like little pockets here and there.
Yeah, there's pockets where it's just things are just still really blooming. Lush.
Like when we were up at above 12,000 feet on that saddle yesterday, there was bitterroot that was still flowering. But everywhere else, we've literally witnessed and gotten to know bitterroot through its whole life cycle.
The Pygmy bitterroot,
as we've walked.
Mainly what we've been seeing so far. Though the bitterroot that you would find in the Pacific Northwest and the Middle Rockies is in Colorado, but we just haven't seen it yet. We've mostly been seeing the tiny little pygmy. I mean, we saw spring beauties flowering in July, which would normally be in the spring.
That's right.
Too.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Traffic jams up a symphony. Car horns scream out in their furious hurry while they blare. Well, I think I lost my key to this funeral procession pace, a race across an asphalt sea to work, where I'm buried 6 feet under drudgery. I mop the floors till they're all smudge free. Meanwhile, all of these crackers are eating brie. They drinking wine and watch TV, saying who died tonight. Let's tune in and see onward. Overtime. Well, I'm overworking overtime. All of my time I'm overworking overtime. All of my time. 'Cause I've been working for a thin dime. Mine is someone else's time. I rack my mind and crack my spine, waiting for
that whistle to whine. And I'm knocked out on the stoop, I'll sit and pine. Oh, wandering underneath this neon sign. Oh, why is it I feel shafted on the dotted line? Oh, singing like a canary in a coal mine. I'm singing why, would they make me wear a tie like a noose around my neck, to that assembly line? They got me hanging on my last paycheck. I'm hanging on my last paycheck on this work. Overtime. Well, I'm overworked. Days my head rings like a gong. I live in slave wage amongst the throng. And does it matter if I'm dead, right or wrong? Oh, I've been caged inside this lab for far too long. So I'll shake my fist just like King Kong. Whoa. And I'll sing my monkey song. Oh yeah. Whoa, whoa. If you know the words, sing along. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Or you can just hit on your bongos. Whoa, 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 whoa. Woo! Buddy, I think it's raining. Is it? Shut up. It's really raining over there.
It's been cool too for us to see, like, I mean, if you're spending time in one place, you get this experience of seeing like a plant come out of the ground and bloom, or if it's a woody plant, like just the transformation of a plant through its seasons, right? If you're paying attention, and walking is a different way of doing that, because right now we're noticing, like, I was noticing a lot of the pedicularises are done too and going to seed, and I'm noticing we've been noticing the death camas is going to seed. Been noticing a lot of the paintbrushes are now browning. We noticed that a lot of the biscuit roots are going to seed in different stages. So seeing, you know, sometimes we're like, okay, we've been seeing the same thing for a while, you know, but then suddenly seeing it in a different way, I think is really important.
Because on the east side, when we were walking through those Ponderosa parks, which were incredible, the biscuit root that we've been seeing throughout the trail, the Samopteris lemoni mountain parsley biscuit root, which is a great breadroot, over there, since it's lower and hotter, the seeds were finally actually ready. So as we walked, we were just stripping the seeds off of the stalks and planting them as we walked. But here on the west side, again, the seeds still have a little ways to, before they're ready.
Pretty succulent.
And it was crazy because, like, yeah, the elephant's head pedicularis is done for the most part, but I've seen a few random spots here and there where there's still some in full bloom. Indian paintbrush and the different kinds are still done, but there's still been a couple areas up high where it was like a slope was covered in yellow or that bright neon pink Indian paintbrush, but then on the other side of the slope, all of them were going to seed. So the seasons have been really skewed and trippy like that because of just where we are and the complex weaving and interpenetration of all these different ecologies and microclimates. And then
so something else we've been noticing too, so we talked about the bristlecone, and we're kind of going in a lot of different directions here, but I really wanted to get specific about some plants. Bristlecones and limber pines, and then we've been seeing Douglas fir and spruces and fir. Douglas fir and fir are different things, different beings. We've been noticing a lot of beetle kill, and I don't know what beetles, I know the pine bark beetle is I'm familiar with in the West, like my experiences in Idaho and Montana and also in California, how the beetles have affected, like, these are beetles that are naturally like occurring in the ecology, but because of drought or different conditions that are happening, the beetles are proliferating. But we notice in some places, like this whole spruce forest is completely dead. And on the east side of the Collegiate Loop, we noticed a lot of dead or dying Douglas fir too.
It was like basically on the west side, because the west side is up higher, a lot of the spruce forests were like sick and a lot of it dead. And then on the east side, which is lower, basically from, where would you say it started? Let me just say Silver Creek trailhead all the way to Monarch Pass, that's like probably over 50 miles.
A lot of
right
dead
there.
Douglas fir.
The Doug fir was all sick and dying. And if to any of you listeners, if you know and could help educate me too, I haven't had a lot of opportunities to get. Neither of us have had opportunities to get into some deeper research about it, but the tips of the Doug fir trees are like withering, and they're like, it looks like they're slowly dying, and it looks like the first sign of the sickness is where the tips look sickly and withered, and like the needles like are all stunted, and we really don't know what to think of it, but yeah, we just, because the last time I did the trail, I did the east side, and that was not happening, and that was about that was like five years
pretty
ago.
New thing.
So
it's pretty dramatic, and I don't know what to think of it because change is inevitable, but we talk a lot. We've been thinking a lot about disturbance, the nature of disturbance, and we've talked about that on the podcast a little bit, and we've been writing about that and what's good or bad disturbance, and natural cycles that the earth breathes and has drought times and non-drought times. It's just, that's a reality, but a lot of what we've been doing to affect the land and the earth in big ways is too much for certain plants. It's too quick. It's not enough. I don't know. So I don't know how to separate what is something that's tragically bad and what is just part of the cycle of things. I mean,
I think the most tragic thing is how as humans today we're not living in right relations with the land and with the ecology, and we're not living in right relations with the earth's cycles. We don't have a harmonious relationship with those cycles, and we feel threatened by those cycles. So when these cycles happen, we feel this sense of alert and harm being done to us because of our human-centric culture and human-centric life way and worldview, and we do these drastic mitigation implements and procedures that actually end up having more harm, and the mitigation is really like causing a lot more harm than good in some ways, you know, because we're not in right relations with the land and with the cycles of the lands and in tune to that, you know.
Yeah. Totally. I was reading about, in the Land Reader, there was a piece about folks that drove through Kansas and in eastern Colorado and into the Rockies during the Dust Bowl, and like what their experience was like of what the Dust Bowl did to the land in the Midwest, the shortgrass prairie in the Midwest, and just thinking about that whole right relations thing too. And it's, yeah, that piece really hit me because of how short of a time it took for humans who didn't have right relations to destroy a whole ecosystem like the shortgrass prairie.
Yeah.
Like 90% of it was tilled up within 10 years or something, and the consequences of that, and then the corporatization of small farms where people had more of a relationship to the land affected the soil, and a natural drought exacerbated this thing that was happening. And I just, yeah, the right relations piece, something that's been coming up a lot, and that's like the whole crux of what we're trying to explore too, is what does that really mean, you know?
What does that mean today in today's context?
In modern times. And that brings up for me too, so we did the east side of the Collegiate Loop, and then we, instead of continuing southwest, we decided to go back up the west side, and we had our friend Teo came and walked with us for a day or so. So Teo is someone I met last year in California at a permaculture training that I did, and we've hung out some since then. And yeah, Teo came and brought some really cool perspectives. We
He's
had
so
some
awesome.
great conversations.
Is today Monday?
I think so.
Monday's
It was like Friday, Saturday.
Man Crush Monday, Teo. Teo's man Crush for Man Crush Monday.
His
He's
perspective
so awesome.
on like, we did a whole recording with him, and we'll see whenever that comes out. It'll be like, I don't know when yet, because it was sort of these candid conversations we recorded, and we have to piece them together. But his perspective on like modern indigenous futurism, and he's a native person, and like how we can't go back and we have to innovate in the future, and like really thinking about modern technology and modern new ways of engaging the land that are still rooted in spirit and story and connection and ancestral knowledge, but not necessarily, but taking ancestral knowledge and like turning it into something new, you know. And it's kind of refreshing to hear his perspective on it, and that sat with me since he visited with us.
Definitely. Having right relations with technology and having a spirited, sacred relationship with technology, because the weird thing about our modern cultural relationship with technology is that we don't see technology as a living intelligence that informs our living intelligence, you know. And you
start to see technology often as like dead things that have no spirit or life in them. And if all things are God or the spirit, great spirit, or whatever you want to name it, then the computer that required mining also has a spirit.
Because those computers are made out of these complex minerals, like, you know, inside of that computer, the circuit boards are made out of these minerals that, and
whether or not that's something that is, it's not really about defining it as being good or bad. I mean, it obviously requires enslavement of land and people to mine things, but it's about like, okay, we have this thing we're using. How can we have, what kind of relationship can we have with it? And that's something. And then I thought about your titanium digging stick, which is not traditional because it traditionally would be made of wood, right? You know?
But Teo said he's like, that titanium digging stick is like indigenous futurism at its finest right there. And that was kind of cool. Like, yeah, it's just about like letting go, because I've been in like the primitive skills world and scene, and I just like really don't like the puritanism, you know, like it's like the Christian puritanical aspect of it has bled into that world and stuff, and how we like we have to, and part of this whole project is like letting go of that purity, that like fallacy and purity that's really unrealistic, and finding and walking in the question of how can I make this real today? Like, what does wild tending mean today? What is all of this mean in the context of today, you know? And what does having right relations with the land mean today? And being realistic about it and not holding some romantic time in mind
that we have to live in like a grass hut and be totally separate from so-called society, and like, I don't know.
I've been writing about this a lot, just like in these ideologies, like, hey, I love grass huts. I'm not against living in grass huts. The what it really needs to be looked at is that is the fact that people don't see the interpenetration and inseparability of culture and ecology. Mm-hmm. You know, and I actually started writing a piece today on, and it literally called On Babylon and Wildness. And I go into like what Babylon is as a concept and as a reality, and how we are a part of it, and how, you know, there's this, when people talk about Babylon and wildness, there's like this dichotomy, but like Babylon is everywhere, and Babylon wildness exists on the landscape. So it's like saying take a town, for example, and say this town is Babylon, but the forest edge right outside of town is not Babylon. That is wild. And these kind of dichotomies, I think, are really harmful, because they imply that like the separation of us from the wild, and which I think is a kind of like dissonance of like our role in ecology, because we're ecological beings, and towns are themselves complex ecologies that are just different, you know, and they're very like, they're human informed and engineered and created ecologies in a way, but like how are towns not ecological, just as complex ecologies as forests? When we were in Salida, I was seeing all these old apple trees that the old settlers there planted, and then I'm like, oh wow, that's so cool. Like, think about all the bears that come here and eat those apples and then go shit them out and then plant more apples, you know, and how like that's Babylon and wild engaging and interpenetrating each other, and really that there's no separation. And when we can see that there's no separation, we can therefore take responsibility as a human being, as a human ecological being in the ecology, you know, and not just like step away from it and say, I don't want to fuck anything up anymore, hands off.
We talked about this a bit with Teo, and so some of this will, if we get it edited anytime soon, will be part of that conversation as well. But like that whole hands off, hands on thing is like a whole other,
it's a big topic,
yeah. But something that Teo said that maybe we recorded or not, I can't remember, but just speaking to like the spirit, finding the ancestors of cities, or like the spiritedness of like the corner that he stands at every day before he goes to get coffee or whatever. Like, if we don't look for the spirits in cities to honor, then there's a problem there as
like,
well.
Like if we can't see like a city corner as a sacred place, just as sacred of a place as like an old growth cedar grove, then that is speaking to the schism in our psyche and in our hearts, like in our separation from ecology, because it's all parted together. Like cities happen in ecologies, and cities develop their own ecologies, and like that's what, like, ultimately my vision with wild tending and how it's a very relevant in topic in the context of today is that it can be accessible to anyone, whether you're like a rural folk or a city folk, suburban folks. Like, it really doesn't matter where you are. You're living in and with and co-creating a cultural landscape, which is an ecology. Whether you're helping co-create a cultural landscape of monocrops of corn or soybeans, or a food forest, or a garden, or like a butterfly garden with wildflowers, like you're participating in cultural landscapes and co-creating that. So it's good for us to be aware of our sphere of influence and our power as human beings, and to take responsibility for that and own that. And you know, like, I know this is a really sensitive topic right now that people can be kind of upset about, but we were having this conversation with Teo about like how like when are humans going to start re-indigenizing themselves, because like in re-indigenizing ourselves we are taking responsibility to have right relations with the land, you know, and like it's an important, and I think just like with the whole social justice movement right now, that's like a really sensitive topic to bring up right now. But like, when is it gonna start being a more regular conversation around like because we talked about this a little bit, like this sense of you can't go home and you can't stay here, that like radical white politically correct social justice warriors are putting on themselves and on each other, and this white guilt and self-hatred, and how like we can't go back to Europe and we can't stay here, so like we're,
or wherever you come from, because it's not everyone who's settlers here are from Europe. But
and we started talking about what one of Teo's friends and colleagues at the Cultural Conservancy in California says. His name is Nicholas Redbird. When he talks about California, he says you have all these millions of people in California and they're not going anywhere. You know, these people aren't indigenous to this place and they're not going to leave this place. So we need to make them native, you know? And what does that mean? That means like we need to take responsibility and be in right relations with the land. And I think that that's like a really important conversation, because ultimately like a lot, like it's almost like the fate of our like planet hangs in that responsibility of humans like taking upon themselves to be in right relations with the land.
So what so for what we've been doing on the trail to try to like engage, sometimes it's just watching, but what does wild tending look like on the trail? Like what have we actually been doing here and there more specifically?
I mean,
it's just what we've decided, you know, to do here, and you know there's plenty of things we could do.
It's kind of, or
land tending. Like,
I've been getting a reality check of like how tired I am from walking every day. And how like it takes energy to wild tend, and it's different when you're not in a place for longer. But at the beginning of the trail, when we were in lower elevation Doug fir forest, we got to camp one day in this nice campsite, and there was like just this crazy thickets of all these young Doug fir everywhere. And so I went and I cut them down. I was like, all right, this is like,
you thinned them out.
I thinned them out, yeah. You know, because there was like these bigger healthy Doug firs around, and surrounding them and crowding them out was like all these tiny little stringy young Doug fir thickets, you know. So I just went and I cut them all down. I like made a nice little pile out of it, and that's a form of wild tending. It's like fire mitigation, you know. I was like, if this caught on fire, if this Doug fir thicket caught on fire, it would like travel up into the canopy and crown of these big Doug firs, and that's how you have like disastrous wildfires, is like fuel accumulations and fire loads from not doing stuff like this.
Somebody will use that at some point.
Yeah,
to
and then
cook on or whatever.
I left it right there by like by a campsite fire ring. When it's dry, they can use it. And I don't know what else. We just like plant really, and we GPS point. We pinpoint the areas, and in planting we create disturbances. You know, so today we were planting yampa and biscuit roots, but then there's those other biscuit roots that are growing there, and I was using my cupping to really disturb and dig up the dirt around it, and I planted into that disturbance. But then once those biscuit root seeds are ripe and ready to blow off, they'll have safe spaces of upturned soil to blow into.
The biscuit roots that are already growing there,
Yeah.
intermingled with, we seeded more biscuit roots in that same area. There was some sort of vole or mole or ground living creature that had tilled up some soil that we put seeds in, and a lot of places we've gone, we've used nurse bushes, whether that's sagebrush or the bushy cinquefoil or juniper or uva ursi. We planted in, sort of ruffled up the soil a little bit around the bottom of some of those bushes, and it's still cool and moist in those areas, so we deposit seeds there and cover them up just a little bit, just enough for like whatever size seed it is, you know, and those bushes will protect those seeds for when it gets really hot out. So that's a lot of what we've been doing, is planting seeds. I mean, in some people's practices, they're doing things with bushes, woody bushes. Like, I mean, we could be tending huckleberries, the whortleberries here, but they're doing just fine. It's like,
they're so small. Like, I'm like, it's different. Like, you can layer big huckleberry bushes up in the Northwest, but layering these tiny little whortleberries, I'm like, I don't think there's any point in trying to layer these. They're so small. But a couple times I've layered the canes of some currants, gooseberries. You know, I dug a trench and I laid down the cane branch and I buried it and put a rock on top of it, so that will shoot roots into the ground and it'll make the bush kind of just like triple in size. So, I mean, for any of you folks out there that are interested in like what you can start doing in your areas, if you ever run into berry bushes by your campsites and you have berry bushes by your favorite campsites, take the canes and dig little trenches and lay them down and bury them and put a rock on top of it. And then next time you come back, you know, your berry bushes are just going to get bigger and bigger, you know, and you can clone in place. Like, you can bury a portion of that cane, and then it shoots roots and becomes its own plant. And then when you come back, you cut it away from the main plant and you dig it up, and then you just go move it to a spot where you think that you would like to see another berry bush.
Speaking of berries, we've been definitely eating some berries lately.
Oh yeah.
And
pooping them out too.
That's another wild tending practice. But the poopergation.
Yeah.
We kind of missed some of the berry and fruit season down lower. The plums and apricots, we've been up high so much that we kind of missed that. And the Saskatoon berries we missed a lot of because they like it lower.
Yeah.
But June berries or Saskatoon berries, but we've been seeing a lot of different currants, gooseberries. They're both ribes genus, right? Or ribes genus.
Whichever one.
But lots of different species of those. A lot on the east side of the Collegiate Loop. And we just ate so many gooseberries.
Yeah, specifically
the wax currant.
The wax currants, yeah.
So many of those.
Mm-hmm.
They're really tasty too.
Yeah.
Not too sweet. And there's just so many of them. The birds seem to love them too. And we've been finding raspberries and wild strawberries.
Definitely.
A lot of those.
I made sure to eat as many wax currants as I could when we were around them. and then I would poop in places where I thought they could use some wax currents.
Yeah.
So that's another way, another wild tending technique is like we're like seed surrogates basically, and we a lot of our trail food is from like berries that harvested last year, you know, so we got like different kinds of gooseberries and currants, huckleberries,
Blueberries, blackberries,
and blackcap raspberries and Saskatoon. We make like cakes. I smash them up, make cakes, and dry
both
them
of us
out.
separately last summer before we were hanging out more. We both put up a lot of berry cakes, so we've been putting them in our resupplies. So their seeds are viable. So when we make oatmeal or something, we'll like put them in at the end.
Yeah.
After they don't get too hot. You know?
So we drop little seed bombs every morning. Or a seed bomb deposit from each of us every morning.
If you're hydrated enough.
Yeah.
No.
But I know it's controversial, but I tell you what, folks, like poop is like a really ancient wild tending tool, you know, and like there's caves in Nevada where they've found like all these rolled up bundles of dried human poop that was full of seeds
being saved to plant.
And humans, like, I could get really into this. Some of you might not want to hear it, but yeah, you can intelligently eat and poop in a way where you can and then process that poop and then get a bunch of seeds to plant, because when they go through your gut digestive flora strips off the protective layer on the seed coating that makes it viable to germinate, you know.
We've actually been seeing some bear poop and seeing different berries in them.
Oh man,
in the bear
loaded.
poop. Yeah, which is kind of cool to
total seed bombs.
Do the scat studies, you know,
yeah.
on the trail.
Oh my god.
Seeing the see a fresh one morning it was full of like
buffalo berry,
yeah. Which is kind of a weird.
They call it soap. Another name is soapberry.
Yeah, it's like not like as tasty as other berries, but
they like
the
it.
bears like it, and the right, and then the currants.
There was like some other kind of seed in there that I still haven't figured out what it was.
Yeah, and some other kind of thing, but yeah, seeing scat.
Those bears are like seed. They're like seed bazookas. The bears. Man, that's what I aspire to be like in my life. Is a seed bazooka, like a bear. Everywhere I go.
I wanted to bring up before we finish this recording, just how our experiences have been with this experience as a pilgrimage, too, in a way, or like the way that walks like this can be really ecstatic at times or really hard at times, and for both of us, to kind of briefly reflect on how that has been a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I expected that.
Yeah.
And you know, we're doing a walk that's very physically and mentally strenuous, even though we're not walking like as far as other people, but also doing this research and planting and writing work along with it. Yeah, there's been some days where I just can't bring myself to write anything.
Yeah.
Or care about anything at the end of the day, you know, and some days I feel a lack of motivation, and other days I feel really motivated, and so.
Yeah, because you get into camp. Before you get into camp, when you're walking in the morning, you have all these amazing ideas. I've been trying to be more disciplined about pulling my little pocket notebook out and writing them down. And then when you get into camp, when you want to write it down, you just like feel tired, and
so yeah, some days we have
hard.
A lot of energy, or we'll stay in camp longer and write and do some of our work in the mornings, and then we just end up getting in the camp later that day or something later in the evening.
Yeah.
But you know, we both have done walks before. You did the Colorado Trail a couple years ago, 4 or 5 years ago.
5 years ago.
And then I did the Camino de Santiago a really long time ago, and remembering that kind of like flow of what walks bring up,
Yeah.
stuff outside of our life here right now, and craving something different, like in a way the consistency and the simplicity of this routine is sort of really nice, but also sometimes I'm like, I just want to eat something different.
Yeah.
Or I just want to do this thing that I would normally do, or it's really a different way of being in the world to walk every day,
Yeah, it is. It's pretty crazy that the processes and the cycles that we go through in ourselves and the cycles that the land goes through in seasons, and you see that you're not separate from the land, and that the seasons that the land goes through, you go through those seasons with the land. And Kelly and I have basically been in a perpetual spring from February until recently, and we've been up in the high country a lot lately. Like the past week, we've been almost above 12,000 feet the whole time, and one, being above 12,000 feet after a while just kind of like beats you up a little bit because the sun is intense,
the wind,
the oxygen that, like, I grew up in Colorado, but the high altitude still like kicks my butt, and the wind is intense. And then I've also just been seeing like the seasons start to change up in the high country. And beginning of the trail, I was like in this feverish, ecstatic excitement the whole time, and of this, like, the newness and the learning, and I've learned so much. And the past couple weeks I've felt a huge shift where I'm not feeling that anymore. I feel a lot more deep about things. There's a lot more grief or sadness or mourning I feel coming up, sometimes for no apparent reason. I get these waves of depression that are really tied into the land, like when we go into towns, or when I see just like when I'm overwhelmed by there being 200 tourists at a mountain pass that I just want to walk through and just be at, but there's like 200 people taking selfies on this mountaintop, and gentrification, this place I love, I don't know, there's just, I really haven't been feeling that feverish excitement lately. I've been feeling more sadness, but also presence to the land and gratitude to be here, and just deep love and care and joy for this place. But I realized, like, I've been in a perpetual spring since February, and now it's time for me to come down. Like, I need to let myself go through this transition with the land that I'm transitioning with, and know that that's okay, and not to like think anything's wrong with me or demonize myself and think that something's wrong. But I'm just like, yeah, I'm with this land, I'm a part of this land, and as this land changes, I change with it.
I feel like the conversation around seasonal cycles and mental health is like a whole other topic.
Yeah,
that is important to consider in our lives, and being in connection with the land and our inner landscapes, and a pilgrimage or a walk, intentional walk, plan to go, what we're doing. The journey itself is a cycle. The what we're witnessing is a cycle, and so inevitably we ourselves have our own inner cycles. So we're trucking along and doing the thing, but yeah, it's definitely got its ups and downs. And I feel, for the most part, our bodies are holding up pretty well.
Yeah.
Barely blisters. I wore the same socks for a week, which is a bad idea. Yeah. Hiking tip 101: don't do that, because they get crusty and then they give you blisters. Because I was doing fine in that way with blisters and stuff until I thought it was a good idea to wear the same socks for a week. But generally, our bodies have been holding up good. Mentally, some days we're just really tired, and other days we're really excited, and we go really far, or we get really inspired or something. So the east side of the Collegiate Loop had a lot more town resupply times, you know, and we had a lot more interaction with civilization, I guess. But the west side has been a lot more grandiose. Felt like we were in Lord of the Rings at times. And less towns, but definitely people still everywhere, you know. And honestly, even though we've been in less towns, it's I like having a little more time away from like cell phone service and Wi-Fi and decision making in a capitalist world of like, do I buy this? Do I go here? Do I go there? You know, it's nice to have more time between those things, but I wouldn't say that we've been away from civilization like you were saying earlier about Babylon and the wild. Like when we were walking with Teo, we were walking through an area that was heavily mined, and that it's like I don't know how many different little mine portals we saw that day. Yeah. And this crazy tunnel they built. I don't quite understand.
It was a railroad tunnel. So we walked for a few miles on an old preserved portion, which is the Continental Divide Trail is on, of the Denver Pacific Railroad track. So we were walking across the old, what are those pieces of wood that they put railroad ties. The railroad ties from early 1900s, late 1800s.
Some of them are pretty rotted down and gone.
Yeah, and which is a trip. So that's like what we're saying about past, present, and future being very molded together. Because when we walked on that with this perspective, we really all sat with like, wow, we're like, think about the history of this area right here, and we're walking this right now.
And a lot of the passes we have to go over, the pass is kind of like this little nook in between two mountains that's like the low point that seems like the only way across sometimes.
Yeah.
We don't know all the way, you know, what exactly was a Ute trail and what was all the time, but I know a lot of these areas, like, there's only one way up and down, like over the pass, you know, and there is like likely, I mean, we've been reading history bits here and there of certain, like the Cottonwood Pass that we passed yesterday, like when we were we stopped at Cottonwood Hot Springs and there was stuff written about that pass there,
and that was an old Ute Ute route.
So I mean, it's interesting to think about geography and people's movements and how we're moving now in the past, and
and our relationship to ecology and our movement and how that affects it, and just, you know, the back to the Babylon and wildness thing, you know, this is a big conversation we've been having in bits and pieces. We'll get into it in the next talk. We'll make a point to do that, but you know, the whole fallacy of wilderness and how it erases indigenous history too, and like the origins of wilderness. I'm not going to get into it. What I'm going to get into briefly is just talking how and that's been part of like the weirdness of just seeing like how Babylon and culture and ecology are inseparable, is like what we call wilderness, which is these arbitrary boundary lines of roadless areas. They are but like little tiny islands in this like sea of human culture and civilization. And like people like to do the west side because it's a lot more isolated and you get way the heck out here. But basically the whole trail we've been on the west side, there have been so many tourists absolutely everywhere out here. There was this one parking lot way up in the mountain high country, and I counted New York, Oklahoma, Michigan,
this was
Wisconsin.
Like not an easy road to get in.
No,
either.
This is like way up in the Collegiate Mountains, like seriously way up there on the hard road. Yeah, there was New York, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Oklahoma, California plates, and New Mexico. Like there's so many different plates, and there's just so many people everywhere. And I think a lot of that has to do with Corona too. You know, I've never really experienced like weekdays of this much busyness in Colorado, and I think like the coronavirus, people are just trying to get out of the cities and stuff, but just like how getting lost becomes a real privilege and a skill in today's world, because you you know.
Yes.
Like I remember before Finn died, she would tell me like I would just go and try so hard to get lost in places, and I never could because I'd always come to like a town or a road eventually, you know. And you see that these places are just these wilderness places are just islands, and
Yeah, getting lost is such a privilege. That's like, yes.
it's a skill set.
And the ability to even seek solitude, which is also another whole conversation that I think about. Like the privilege of having that option is something I really realize that it's like such a big part of American culture to like also, I think, want to go out into the, you know, out on the land. There is like a ruggedness to our culture, this kind of like solitary man or something in the woods thing, you know?
The myth. There's a name for it. It's called the myth of the American male, the lone wolf man. Who's, yeah. I think it's a pretty dysfunctional. Yeah. Dysfunctional life. Wait.
Well, we should probably end that because it's we made our food, we ate dinner while we're doing this. It's dark now. It's time to go to bed.
I was eating while we talked, so if you were hearing me smacking my food and I farted a couple times, you might hear that on the recording.
Oh man, we have like 2 bites left of some sort of lentil rice couscous miso thing that we made.
It's good.
But
yeah, and I just also thank you all so much, like you guys who listen to this, y'all who listen to this and support us. It means a lot, and
the nice messages you send.
Yeah.
Or the feedback.
Yeah.
Whatever kind of feedback.
All of it's good. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, let's go to bed and try to get up early tomorrow and do a bigger day.
Sounds good.
And I'm ready to sleep good in my sleeping bag. All right.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all. This episode of the Ground Shots podcast was produced by Opia Creative. Our music is by Mother Marrow. If you'd like to help us continue to make this audio project a reality, consider becoming a monthly supporter on our Patreon page at patreon.com/ofsedgeandsalt, where we have rewards like entry into patron-only giveaways, additional audio interviews, extra educational content, and much more. You can also share our work and give us a review on iTunes. Visit our website at ofsedgeandsalt.com to see what else we're up to and a log of our episodes when they come out. Check out our show notes for information about how to find us and our guests. Until next time, y'all, thanks for listening.